This is Michael Clara. Welcome to another edition of my blog, Local School Boards Can Make a Difference. Today is July 12th, 2016, and I wanted to make a blog entry and comment on an editorial by the Salt Lake Tribune that came out in today's paper. It's titled, Salt Lake City School District Dumps Diversity Goof and New Superintendent's Lap. So I'm going to read what they wrote, and then I'm going to comment on it. And the article says, in the editorial, it said, Lexi Cunningham took over last week as a new superintendent of Salt Lake City School District. But instead of a nice floral arrangement or a fruit basket, what was waiting for her on her desk was a big, embarrassing, and totally avoidable mess. And what they're referring to is that the school district, we just had our first school board meeting last Tuesday, and Dr. Cunningham was hired, as this article points out, by the board, and this is as close as she's going to get to flowers in a fruit basket because her predecessor did indeed make a mess for her that she walked into. The editorial board says the week before, while nobody, including members of the school board, was looking, outgoing Superintendent Mikkel Withers rearranged his administrative box chart in such a way that the district official in charge of equity and diversity was kicked down a rung in official stature. The occupant of that post, rather than reporting directly to the superintendent, now resides one bureaucratic layer below, under a member of the superintendent's cabinet. So what happened here is that Mikkel, this is, as you see here, we have four these four positions here that came about as a compromise, and these four chiefs was a compromise that came about in January of this year, and what the editorial is referring to is Dr. Christie was removed from this position, and then that leaves the entire equity department now. Then parts of it report to these three chiefs over here on the right. So essentially what happens is he rearranged the organizational structure and did away with the equity department with equity chief that reported directly to the superintendent. The editorial board goes on to say the change may well prove over time to be a distinction without a difference. There is no immediate evidence that matters involving the district's respect for the wide diversity of its student body has or will decline, that any student or student's family will ever notice any change. Now, this is the part of the editorial that I just totally disagree with, but I appreciate the fact that the editorial was even written. I appreciate the perspective that the editorial board has put out there, because I believe what they're saying is actually reflective of what a lot of people in the community really think. What's the big deal about this? And so I'm glad they did say it, because it gives us the opportunity to point out what is the problem. This goes back to June 2014, where part of the equity leadership subcommittee, or committee, if you will, that meets monthly at the school district, we had determined that it's important for the district to have, at the time we were asking, this is when Mikkel was here, we were asking for an associate superintendent of educational equity and diversity. And we felt that it was important to have somebody that has the authority and the power to make changes within the district, a school district, mind you, that has a majority ethnic minority student body. And we felt it was essential to have somebody like Dr. Christie in that position that could address the issues of equity and diversity and meet those needs that are currently unmet. And it had to be somebody with authority, which is why in January of this year, this compromise worked out. These orange boxes that you see here, and I'll talk about that in a second, but that was a compromise that we ended up with a director of equity. Going back to the editorial board, they say, but the appearance of such things matters, and it matters a lot. Well, when we talk about appearances, if we just left it at that, this is what, in the fall of last year, what the leadership of the school district looked like. It was all Caucasian people. And in fact, those 3 orange boxes over here, McKell had to, at the time, he had an assistant superintendent, Dr. Christian, and initially at that time demoted her so that he could put these 3 in on the associate superintendent level. And as you know, the community was not going to have that. Neither were the employees, and he had to change the structure. So this is what I guess my point is. This is beyond just looks. This has some systemic implications also. So here the editorial board says, in this case, the seeming decision to downgrade the stature of the diversity manager was seen by some interested people as a way to minimize the importance of the topic. And given the fact that it was all done without any public notice or input, that is an easy conclusion to jump to. Well, and I would just say it's a valid conclusion to jump to, and it's not about the importance of the topic. It's about the application of being able to address issues of equity. For example, here, the way this compromise chart ended up being in January is Dr. Christie had all these issues of equity and advocacy, and she had the authority of an associate superintendent that she could implement these things. And it's a little more than just a topic. It's actually, we need to make changes within the school district in terms of the structure, in order to change the educational outcomes for students of color. And this was one of the solutions in terms of a compromise from an organizational structure standpoint, was to have Dr. Christie equal in authority to the other associate superintendents that McKell wanted to put in. That compromise that I was just showing came about because the board voted on it and supported it based on the outcry from the community in the fall, and based on the 5 employees that came forward that were from the association of the administrators of the district and from the equity department. And this was, if you recall, back in October, this was the plan that McKell first tried to propose, that he wanted these 3 people under him running the district of a majority ethnic minority school district. And these people were appointed to the exclusion of any administrators of color, which we have 20 of them that either have a PhD, ED, or master's degrees, and they were all excluded from the possibility of serving in this capacity under the superintendent. And this was rejected by the community and by the employees. And we thought for a point we had come to a compromise by putting Dr. Christie back on that level over equity. And, that was short-lived. The editorial board says that was the response of folks as diverse as the chairman of the Utah Republican Party and the president of the local NAACP, as well as members of the Utah Coalition of La Raza. Each of them told board members the other day that the move is particularly discouraging in view of the fact that the district's treatment of minority students, who make up 60% of the total student body, has not been altogether exemplary in the past. So here are the 3, and the Tribune covered that. Reporter Annie Knox covered it. It says Utah GOP and NAACP slam Salt Lake City schools over diversity department move, but former superintendent says criticism is unfounded. The editorial board goes on to say Withers said no such slight was intended, but the explanations offered by the former superintendent and by the board president, Heather Bennett, who said the details of the change were a confidential, personal matter, were less than satisfying. And I agree. And this is Heather Bennett, the board president, hugging McKell on his last day at the board meeting. And I titled this whole administration, that since I've been on the school board for the last 4 years, I would summarize it as incompetence, camouflaging, corruption. And I know that may be a little harsh for some people, but that's exactly what's going on. And I'm speaking, my truth on this and what I've eyewitnessed, and I don't know how else to say it or dress it up for people. The editorial board goes on to say if any particular district administrator isn't performing up to expectations, that can be an internal matter, which is true. It could be, it should be. But this is an example of one of the comments that somebody wrote in this article in the Tribune, in the comment section. Some anonymous person said, why did you not ask the question of why the person is facing this org chart change? It is not a reflection on the importance of job duties. The current person outright lied about having a PhD, even had it put on her nameplate. So I'll go part two. I'll make a different presentation and address this kind of just outright lies and foolishness. And it speaks though to a larger. This is a symptom of a larger problem where ethnic minority students are marginalized and discarded. And this is happening to the adults in the system. And this is where the genesis, if you will, when this treatment happens to students of color and it happens to adults of color, then this is why we come up with the term white privilege, because it's designed to just control people of color and to not allow them to be part of the system. The editorial board ends by saying, but to rearrange the lines of responsibility on the district's administrative flow chart is not a private personal decision. It is a policy choice, one that should have been more openly vetted, at least among board members, if for no other reason than that at least one of them might have pointed out how bad it would look to members of the public, because it looked awful. And I agree with this. But the one thing they don't know is that even if they did tell us before, and I disagree, I'd be one of the few. Well, I think there might have been 2-3 of us who would have disagreed with this move because of the. The accusations they're making don't hold any water, but that probably still wouldn't have changed anything. But, so I appreciate the editorial board. And in closing, I want to go back to showing that we had already settled this issue back in November when Mikkel rearranged this is Dr. Smith who came and spoke to the board. This is Josie Valdez who came and spoke to the board in November. And as you see here, that she's talking about the reorganization at the time, that we're here to discuss concerns about the recent reorganization. And she points out that by state law and by our own policy, only the board has the authority to reorganize the structure of the district or to approve it. The superintendent can make recommendations, but they just don't happen. They should be approved by the board. And then this is Stanley Ellington is talking about the reposition of the equity department to a lower or less than position will reduce its importance. Now, remember, this happened back in November when they were addressing the initial reorganization that Mikkel did that was rejected. Here in the board meeting, the board then ended up voting for Assistant Superintendent Kathleen Christie to be equal to the directors or the chiefs that they call them here, and she ended up being the fourth one, and that's how we did that. And then just for good measure, Stanley Ellington came back to the district to the board and asked for reminded the board about the reorganization of the equity department. Janetta Williams from the NAAC in December spoke to the board about the reorganization of the equity department, and this language down here comes straight out of the minutes of the board meeting. Archie Archuleta addressed the board and said that the reorganization again of the equity department, and asked the board to reconsider that, which the board did in January. Then they approved this new structure with 4 chiefs that now Mikkel, on his last day on the job a couple weeks ago, demoted then Dr. Christie, so that the organizational chart ends up looking like the very one he created in October that was rejected by the community. So that's why I say that this is, and that's not the only reason, but this is one of the reasons why this is, it's incompetence, it looks like it, but really the deeper problem that we have in this school district is corruption. And I'll explain that in part 2. But in closing, I want to point out here that here, Dr. Christie, this is after all this stuff started happening in October and November, this is Dr. Christie right here in the board meeting, and Mikkel Withers ended up having Dr. Christie sit next to him in the board meetings during November, December, January, February, March, April, May, and June until the day he left. He had her sitting in the board meetings. What's ironic about that, sitting right next to him, and that was his way to kind of deflect the criticism from the community that he was being biased and bigoted, and for lack of a better word. And so to counter that, he has Dr. Christie sitting next to him. What's insulting about that is that she's been the assistant superintendent for several years, and he's never given her that kind of visibility until his butt's in the ringer for making a poor decision and a bigoted one. Then to counter it, he puts her there, and then on his last day on the job, he demotes her. From all the information I have at this point, it was just uncalled for. It was unfair, and I'm disappointed that the new superintendent didn't take the decisive steps to correct this injustice that was done by Mikkel. And I'm not surprised, but just very disappointed too in the board president, who Heather Bennett has always protected Mikkel and allowed him to do these little foolish things that he does. And even though he's gone, we're still having to deal with the fallout of his stupidity. So on the one hand, there's good news that he's gone, and on the other hand, it's gonna take some time now to recover, from his incompetence and the corruption that will be the hallmark of his administration. Thank you.